Another session of Gita on the Go. Well, we have been talking about the science of soul. Indeed, it's a very deep science. Those of us who think that religion is not about science are going to be in for a surprise. So as we were talking, the verse number 12 to 30, Krishna gives Arjun and all of us an insight, a peek inside the spiritual world, the world which is within us, and we haven't probably realized till date that we are not the bodies but the souls. Have you recently picked up an album from maybe a long forgotten closet and had a look at the photographs that were clicked of you when you were maybe this small, an infant, a toddler, early childhood, growing up as a youth, and now? We do think that we are the same people as is visible in the photograph. When we compare the two people having been clicked now and then, is that the same person? Well, we are going to be answering this question very shortly, but let's start with some prayers. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjan Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauruvani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Coming back to the question, do we think the person in the photo and the person sitting in front of you here at the moment, that's me, are we the same people? Well, the answer is yes and no. How do we understand that? To understand that, let's read shloka number 2.13, in which Krishna is telling Arjun, Dehinosmin yatha dehe Komaram yovanam jara Tatha dehantar praptir dhiras tatra namuhyati. Now, what is Krishna telling Arjun? He's saying, as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Now, the purport to this, Srila Prabhupada is giving us some very, very powerful points to ponder on. The first thing that Srila Prabhupada talks about is that every living entity is not really this body. The living entity is the living, breathing, conscious soul. And just as the soul passes or changes its bodies from the childhood to youth to old age, similarly, when the body gets worn out, the soul changes or discards this old worn out body and passes into another body. Now, a very, very profound concept to consider. We might think, what's the proof? What's the proof? You tell me. Now, there's a very, very simple logic that I'm going to appeal at right now. When we talk about the person I was when I was 2 years old and the person I am today, I can say that I am the same person. I can recall the memories maybe back then from childhood, from the other stages of my life, like youth, like adulthood, like when we were in love, and like when we got married, when we had our children, the emotions, the sentiments, everything we were able to recall. So we obviously assume that we are the same person. But to share with you a scientific fact, the bodies change completely every 7 years, as the scientists have found out. It's been discovered that every single atom in our body is replaced by another atom in 7 years' time. So which means that 7 years ago, the body we had, that body is completely different from the body we have now. Not even a single atom is same. Now let's understand this through a very wonderful analogy that I heard one of my spiritual mentors at ISKCON telling us about, and it's a wonderful way to understand how this happens. Suppose you have a computer. You buy a computer, but as time progresses, we know that computers, the parts therein get outdated. There are new developments, new things come up, and you want to replace. Now, of course, these days what we do is we simply discard the older one and buy another more updated version. But what happened, it used to happen earlier, that we slowly start getting the parts replaced, the monitor, the keyboard, the motherboard, and so on and so forth. Now what happens is, after a few years, only the body remains the same, but every single part inside it, we have got it changed. So what happens in our bodies is very similar to this, that the parts inside the body, every single atom is being replaced by others as we are growing older and older, from boyhood to youth to old age. That means, just like in the computer, the parts get replaced, but the user remains the same. Who is the user in this case? The user is the soul. And we say, yes, I am the same person in the photograph, not on the basis of the body, but on the basis of the soul. Because the soul is the same. The seat of the soul is the heart, and it remains the same. Now, if we talk about a very, very beautiful concept, now we find this concept to be applicable and acceptable by many, many different religions in the world. And that's called reincarnation. What is the meaning of reincarnation? Now, karna means flesh. Carnation means to be born in flesh. Reincarnation means to be born in flesh again. Now, the word itself tells that there is somebody who's eternal and who is being born again in flesh, and maybe again and again and again. The reincarnation actually is of two types. There can be the slow incarnation, which we are experiencing as we are growing. As we just talked about, the atoms are being replaced. The flesh is changing. Every moment our body is changing. This is a gradual reincarnation. But when the body grows old and too dilapidated for use, the soul just discards us like an old garment and changes itself into another body. Now this is called abrupt reincarnation. Now, who would actually lament on discarding an old worn out garment? If the shirt is torn, it's very logical and very normal for somebody to discard it and buy a new one. And that's how Srila Prabhupada tells us that a sober person, or a dhira as we call him, is very knowledgeable, fully cognizant about the fact that I am not the body and I am the soul. Number one. Number two, my relation with the super soul is that of eternity and that of serving him. Number three, what is the nature of this material and spiritual nature? So somebody who knows on the basis of the Shastras all these facts is not, I would say, disturbed by this changeover of the bodies by the soul. So a dhira, or a sober person, is one who lives by the Shastra and knowledge, and not by instincts or sanskaras or impressions that he has built up over lifetimes. And that's why the Shastras come into picture. The Shastras are so very important for us to carry on our lives in a wonderful way, knowledgeable way, so that we do not lament which is not to be lamented. In the previous shloka, Arjun was being chastised by Krishna, saying that you're lamenting for somebody who's it's not worth to be lamented on. No, neither for the living nor for the dead. You don't need to lament because this body is only temporary. And now, for example, in this particular purport, Srila Prabhupada tells us that Arjun had no reason to lament for Bhishma and Drona and all his relatives, because anyways Bhishma and Drona are very elevated souls, and they are at least going to get a good birth in the heavens, if not a spiritual body. So there's no reason for Arjun to lament and cry about for their death, because they are only discarding their old bodies and going to get better bodies, right? And that's how Srila Prabhupada explains that somebody who's situated in knowledge will never lament such a loss. Now, again, one more point that Srila Prabhupada goes on to make is that the Mayavadi theory, he thwarts the Mayavadi theories. What do the Mayavadis think? Mayavadis think that God is light, he is impersonal, he is not a person. And we are also his parts who have separated from him temporarily. But once we get back in knowledge and free from Maya, we will go and join him back. We will merge into him. Now here Srila Prabhupada reasons with logic. How can that happen? If we believe that the super soul or God is fragmentable, is, उनको छिन्न भिन्न किया जा सकता है, so that again goes against entire logic of God. God is just absolutely unfragmentable. God के pieces नहीं किए जा सकते. That is the basic forte of being God. And when somebody says that this can happen, is actually refuting the very basis of being God. So it's just not possible. And one knowledge that we just got, that we are souls, not the bodies. And the second point that Srila Prabhupada makes is that the souls are eternal fragmental parts of the super soul. Which means we, of course, we are parts of the super soul or God. But we have always been so. And we are always going to be like that in future also. There was never a time, and there is never going to be a time, when we were one with God physically. We can be one with God in his will, but never physically. Never possible that we just merge into him and lose our identity. And Srila Prabhupada uses the beautiful example of the sun, the moon and the stars. Just like the water bodies reflect the stars as well as the sun or the moon. Similarly, the moon or the sun can represent the super soul and the star, the individual soul. So in different living organisms, the star and the moon can live simultaneously within the same body, but they can never merge together. So the eternality of the super soul is the most important factor here. That eternality of the super soul and the eternal fragments of the super soul, who are the jivas or the living entities, living souls like us. So a very beautiful point to ponder here is that the super soul and the soul can never be on the same level. Bye those. That relationship is, only temporary. For example, between Krishna and Arjun, till now they were behaving as friends. They were behaving as buddies. But as soon as Arjun realizes that Krishna is not just my buddy, he's somebody higher up than me, much higher up than me in knowledge, he claims, or he promotes Krishna to the position of his guru. And that time Krishna takes on the real role of a guru to instruct Arjun. Now, if we were to believe that super soul and soul are on the same level, there is no point here Krishna instructing Arjun, because the living entities can come under the illusion of the Maya Shakti of God. That is the illusory energy of God. Maya. But God can never come under the illusion or illusory powers of Maya, because Maya is an energy of God himself. And that's the reason why, because we can get illusioned, but God can never become illusioned. That's the reason that he's always in a superior position than us. And that's the reason why we have to assume the position of a disciple, of somebody who's receiving knowledge from an eternal source. So this beautiful purport tells us about how the living entity is a soul and changes body every moment gradually, And then one final moment comes in our life when this change is going to happen a little abruptly. And somebody who is a sober person, who is a dhira, is never going to lament that. Another very important fact that Srila Prabhupada makes in this is when the soul changes bodies, then on what basis does it get another body? What kind of a body does it get? There are actually 8.4 million species of life, which means 8.4 million different bodies to choose from. Which one would the soul get in the next birth actually depends on his karma, his actions and his desires. हमारे कर्म और हमारी इच्छाएं ये determine करती हैं कि हमें next birth क्या मिलने वाला है. That's the reason why, so many desires, variety of karma, and that's why 8.4 million species of life Krishna has created for us to be, to choose from, depending on our desires and our actions. Also, a beautiful example comes up in Srimad Bhagavatam of a dhira. There was a certain Maharaj Bharat in the history of Bharatvarsh. Maharaj Bharat, he was a great king, but at one point of time, he realized that he must now move on towards his spiritual life, towards self-realization. So he renounced his kingdom, he went to the forest to meditate, and as he was meditating and realizing himself as a soul, he became a dhira. Because we just defined a dhira or a sober person is one who can realize himself as a soul, his relationship with the super soul, and the nature of this material energy and the spiritual energy. So he was on the process of becoming a dhira. But then what happened one day was when he was meditating on the shores of a river, he found that a female deer who was pregnant to escape a lion was jumping over the river, but she gave birth there, premature birth, to a small young deer baby, and she died in the process. Now, Maharaj Bharat, he picked up the little deer and he brought him with himself. He started rearing him. And he grew so attached with that little baby deer, he forgot why he had renounced such a big kingdom, his own children, his wife, everybody, and came to this forest. Why in the first place had he done this? So he grew so close to the deer that when one day deer did not come back in the evening, he went out searching, he fell down on a stone and he died while remembering the baby deer. And that's why he got the body of a deer in his next birth. Well, Krishna does tell us in 8.58 chapter, 5th shloka, that we get the body of what we are thinking, who we are thinking about at the time of death. So according to his desires and his karma, he got the body of a deer. So he, from starting to become a dhira, he became a dhira, because when somebody gets very much attached to the body of another individual, so these attachments are cause of illusion, of maya. And that's how he became a dhir. Now, as a deer, by the grace of God, he remembered what had happened in his last birth. And he was now very repentant about what he had done with his previous human life. And he was a very sober deer, and he used to just roam about the ashrams of the great sages. And when he died again, he got again the body of a human being. This time he was born in a Brahmin family with lots of Brahmin brothers, illustrious brothers. But he himself chose to show himself as a mudha, or a very, very foolish person, because he did not want to interact with anybody, so that he now doesn't forget about the real goal of human life. So in this birth, as a Jada Bharat, he realizes himself once again, taking all the care not to get illusioned again. And that's how, from a dhira to being a adhira to back to being a dhira, Maharaj Bharat's journey shows us that how a sober person or a dhira can make good use of his life. A very beautiful, I would say, a conclusion from this story. This is actually a real incident that occurred in the history of our Bharatvarsh. We can understand how a soul, when in illusion, can get bound to this material world birth after birth after birth, with all the desires and the actions that we are doing right now, and all the multitudes of desires and desires and desires that we have in our heads. We keep taking birth after birth after birth after birth, one body to another body to another body to yet another one, and do just forget what the purpose of human life was in the first place. So this is a beautiful puppet which tells us about how we can become sober. Well, the word sober is often used in contrast to somebody who's a drunkard. And I would say not a very far-flung analogy here, because when somebody is in illusion, he's like being a drunkard. A drunkard is drunk on alcohol, and a adhira or a non-sober person is drunk on maya, because both alcohol and maya can put an illusory cover over our eyes so that we cannot see the things as they are. So a person who is dhira, not a person who is drunk on maya, will be able to see things as they are, which means that we are the soul and not the bodies. And there is nothing to lament about when a soul discards a body and takes on another one. A beautiful puppet, and we end here today. But let's quickly do the summary points. First, we are not the body, we are the soul, and we are undergoing reincarnation every moment, slowly. And once, of course, when we grow old, or when the time is there for us to go or leave this body, there is one abrupt reincarnation. And for those who think reincarnation is a far-flung fact, it's nothing which is proved, I would like to quote Dr. Brian Weiss and his book, Many Lives, Many Masters, with all their scientific researches on the theories on reincarnation, the real incidents and proved incidents of reincarnation beyond doubt. Please go through them, please read that book, and then the cases which were solved by Dr. Ian Stevenson. They will prove beyond doubt and scientifically that reincarnation is not a myth, it's a fact. So indeed, we are the living soul inside. I will share with you some stories of reincarnation maybe in the next session. Also, some near-death experiences and some out-of-the-body experiences made by people who will bear testimony to the fact that they were able to come out of this body and see this body as an inanimate object. I would say it's a hair-raising, thrilling experience when we make that, I would say, the discussion. And then the second point is that the living eternal soul is a part and parcel of the living eternal super soul, but they are always eternally distinct from each other. They never merge into each other. There were never a time which happened when these two were one, or there will never be a time in future when these two will become one. Now, the third point is that the soul and the super soul can never be placed on the same platform, because the super soul can never come under the influence of illusion or maya, but the soul, the living entity, can come under the influence of maya or illusion. That is the reason why Arjun is making Krishna as his guru. And the fourth point, that a dhira or a sober person is one who knows that I am not the body, I am the soul, and my relation to God is eternal, and this material energy is an energy, it's the external energy of God. But there also exists another energy of God, which is called the spiritual energy, of which we are also a part. And if we go into the shelter of that spiritual energy, we will break all the material bondages and live eternally in a super blissful life in the spiritual planets with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself. So we'll meet again for another session. Thank you so much for joining me. Chant Hare Krishna and be happy.